my ducks, it's Simon here. Welcome back to the Hermit's Cave. So it's the last day of the year. I don't know about you, but when I get to the end of the year, I naturally start to reflect, usually on the year and everything that's happened, but also as a spiritual practitioner, I reflect back on my practice over the year. How it may have grown and developed, how it may have taken little turns either way, and sometimes how it's even got a little bit stagnant. And I always find that when I come to the end of the year, as many of us do when we're starting new journals and things like that, we kind of set some intentions, not resolutions, I don't do well with them, but set some intentions for the year ahead. This year, I've been thinking about the fact that it's almost 4 decades since I picked up my first ever tarot deck, which is this one, the 1JJ Swiss. In fact, this exact format, this packaging, this was gifted to me though by Sandra a few years ago, who doesn't do pips and passed it on, but that was the exact set, the exact kit that I had way back in 1987 as a young 16-year-old discovering tarot, and indeed my first deck for the first time. I would never have imagined then that almost 40 years later, tarot would have had such a huge impact on my life, certainly on my spiritual practice, but more than that, just on my day-to-day life as well. So I think it's fair to say that tarot isn't just something that I do, it's something that's quietly walked beside me for all of these years through periods of growth, uncertainty, through grief, through joy, and also, I guess, through personal transformation. It's offered me life enriching transformation, actually, and moments of deep insight, and I guess revealed life-enriching truths at times when I needed them the most. I guess what I'm trying to say is I am who I am today because the tarot has revealed to me certain lessons, not just within my spiritual practice, as I mentioned, but in my everyday life. And so I want to share with you all today just how much of an impact having the tarot as a spiritual tool in my life has helped me in numerous ways. And this morning I sat and I journaled, and I think there's around 16, 17 areas of my life, both everyday aspects as well as part of my spiritual practice. The two are interconnected, aren't they? If you are a person who has a spiritual life, then that's part of your everyday life anyway. But I've kind of categorized them into the day-to-day, the mundane, the work life, the family life, relationships, and then also into kind of my spiritual practice and beliefs. So this video is about what tarot has taught me over the last 4 decades. And what I'll be doing, I will flip the camera while I talk about each of these areas in which the tarot has benefited my life. And I'll share with you some standout decks. Now, they won't necessarily correspond or correlate with the areas that I'm talking about, but just as a visual, I think it would be nice to share with you some decks that have had a place in my heart, that have connected with me on a deep and profound way. So I'll flip the camera around. I'll say in advance, thank you for watching, and I would love it if perhaps going into the new year, you might want to respond and talk about what tarot taught you over your practice, whether it's many decades like myself, or whether you're relatively new and where you are with the tarot. It would be fun if you wanted to join in. All right, let's turn that camera. Okay, so the first category that I'm going to be talking about is self-awareness. Now, self-awareness, I have to start with this one because it's one of the biggest things that tarot has taught me, particularly when I think back right to the beginning of picking up my first tarot deck. I started to notice how the same cards would turn up when I was thinking or behaving in a certain way. And if, like me, you make a note of the cards that are coming up in a reading, then you can quickly see the patterns that are forming with your tarot practice, the cards that are appearing on a regular basis. And I can honestly say that I wasn't aware at the time of my emotional reactions to things, or my habits that were holding me back, or keeping me from seeing things from a different perspective, responding to things in a more positive way. And in particular, I would say my reluctance to face certain situations head on and deal with them. I used to have a tendency, and I guess if I'm honest, I still do to a degree, but I'm better at it. But I would have a tendency to avoid things. And tarot very quickly became a mirror for me. Now, I've talked about tarot as a mirror many times. My website, if you look up the Hermit's Cave website that I did some eight or more years ago now, talks about how, for me, the tarot is a mirror that I hold up to myself, and what I see in the cards is my life state at that present moment reflected back to me. So the tarot quickly became a mirror for me, not just showing me what was happening around me, but what was going on inside me as well. And a lot of the time that was happening before I was ready to admit it to myself. So the tarot really did help me to become more self-aware. Gosh, I forgot just every time I pick this deck up how much I love this. This is the 1JJ, my first deck, but this is the Conrad Stain version, which is in vintage from MPC, and it's just beautiful. Absolutely. I mean, just look how gorgeous that is. Anyway, we're not just here to talk about how beautiful cards are. Probably need to go a bit quicker through them as well for each prompt. The next prompt that I wanted to talk about is personal responsibility. I can honestly say that tarot has never let me off the hook, even in those really difficult conversations. The cards kept bringing me back to my own choices and my own responses. And this kind of continues on from what I've just been talking about, because my tendency was always to avoid difficult situations, and I'm a born worrier, and I've always battled with fear and the what ifs. And again, tarot has taught me that actually, even in difficult conversations, at the root of everything, it's about my own choices and my own responses to things. And if I'm not moving forward, it's because I'm not taking personal responsibilities. So the cards showed me where I still had agency. When you think sometimes that circumstances are outside of your control, and situations may feel overwhelming, then I still have a choice, and I still have a guide, a roadmap that gives me those sort of prompts to tap into the knowledge I have within. Because what I get conflicted with the tarot. Sometimes I think, yeah, it can predict, but actually on a much deeper level, it's not necessarily about predictions. It's about tapping into that reservoir of knowledge that we have within us and looking for answers that we have to bring to the surface, because tarot is a mirror, remember. So over time, I learned to stop asking why things were happening to me, and started reframing and thinking about things a little bit different, and started asking what I was meant to learn, or how I was being asked to respond differently. Because it was clear that my previous default position of why, I needed to do some mental reframing, and instead of asking why, start asking what. Instead of why is this happening, what am I meant to learn? And then the second way forward is how. How can I respond differently? How can I meet this challenge that I'm facing? How can I grow and develop? How can I get the best outcome from this situation? So personal responsibility was a huge lesson that tarot taught me over the 4 decades that I've had cards in my life. Okay, the next prompt that I want to talk about is patience and timing. If there's one lesson that tarot has repeated over and over again, it's about patience. And for me to be more patient in terms of not wanting everything to happen immediately. And that's in all aspects of my life. It's certainly been something that I've had to get better at in my professional life, particularly because You know, I am somebody who is a completer finisher, and I like things to be done, and to a certain standard. And if I don't see results as quickly as perhaps I'd like, I do get frustrated by that, and that is something that I constantly work on. But what tarot has taught me is that not everything is meant to happen quickly, and not everything can be forced. There were times where the cards made it very clear that waiting was part of the work. Okay, that if things had happened instantly, or I'd forced the situation to make sure that things happened to the time scale that I thought was right, then there would always be something lacking. Either the quality wasn't there, or the longer term impact wasn't what I hoped it would be. So learning to trust timing rather than rushing towards answers or outcomes has helped me change the way I move through life completely. And that's quite a profound shift in my everyday life. Recognizing that the cards showing clearly that things can't be rushed, that waiting is part of the work that I'm doing on myself, and learning to trust the timing of that, because I was able to see that actually by having patience, letting things happen in the way that they need to happen without being forced, actually yielded far greater results than had I not trusted the cards and did it my way. It's great to be the fool and be spontaneous and adventurous and, you know, taking leaps into the unknown. But the fool is on a journey. The fool is on a journey through the deck. And there are lessons to be learnt along that journey. And we are all students in life. And the tarot can provide, as I said, that wonderful blueprint for us to follow. So that's another lesson of what the tarot has taught me: patience and to trust the timing. Now for the next prompt, I'm not using a tarot deck. Well, I am, but I'm going to use my soul cards that was converted into a tarot deck. I've got two sets. So one that's soul cards 1 and 2, Oracle, and then this one, which is a few people in the community. You know, so we've got 6 of water here. Sorry, not 6 of water. I read that completely upside down. Page of water. You know, the page holding the cup. There's no fish, but it's very water. So we use the soul cards to create a tarot deck of 78 cards, and it worked brilliantly, and everybody that did it had their own version, which was wonderful. But the reason why I'm using this deck to illustrate is because what I want to talk about next is around intuition. So this prompt is trust in intuition. You've seen the light, aren't you, there? Okay, that's a little bit better. And tarot has helped me learn what my intuition actually feels like, because it can be such an abstract concept, can't it, when people talk about trust your intuition, and not everybody knows what that is. You know, is it your gut feeling? Is it that still small voice inside your head? Is it your heart? What is intuition? So tarot really helped me to learn what my intuition actually felt like. And with these images, before I put, you know, the tarot structure to them, there was, for a number of years, probably from 2001 to 2008, where I only read with soul cards as an intuitive reader. And these images would change depending on what the querent was asking me, or if I was reading for myself, what my life state was at that time as looking at this. Again, they're called soul cards, they reflect your soul, a bit like that mirror concept I talked about. So to talk about intuition, I really wanted to use this deck. And the more that I worked with the cards, the more I learned to trust my inner voice. Now, when I say inner voice, that doesn't mean I hear words or I hear a voice speaking, but we all have that internal dialogue, don't we? Sometimes, you know, we in our mind will hear our own voices saying things to us. Like this morning, I dropped a cup in the kitchen and it broke. And I was like, the first thing I said to myself was, oh, you're so stupid, because I'd left it on the side of the drainer, and 10 minutes before I thought I need to dry that and put it away, else I'm going to knock it off. And guess what? I knocked it off. So that inner voice was like, oh, you know, you're so stupid. Why didn't you do it? But my inner voice usually is a feeling. You know, my spidey senses, my sixth sense, my gut feeling. And eventually, tarot stopped being something that was external and became a way of confirming what I already knew deep down. And that lesson is running all the way through this, because yes, it's a tool, it is external, but when you get a relationship with your cards, they become an extension of yourself. So they stop becoming something that's just card and ink. And if they become a spiritual tool, or a tool that you come to trust, then it becomes much more than something external. It connects you with what's happening inside of yourself. So for that prompt, trusting my intuition, as well as having the structure, the knowledge, the underpinning knowledge of the tarot, that's when it shifted from me sitting with the cards, grabbing a guidebook, reading its meanings. There's nothing wrong with that if you do that. But it became an extension of myself. And that was a huge shift with the deck. The next prompt is shadow work. Now, I've included this because shadow work, I've talked about it a lot over the last few weeks as well. Shadow work has really been a huge aspect of my spiritual practice. And tarot has a way of showing you what you'd rather not look at. I find it quite a challenge when people say to me, well, they'll either ask, what is shadow work? And all I'd say is look up Carl Jung. He talks about the shadow. And how do you do shadow work? Or how can I get involved in doing shadow work? And it's a very personal thing. And I always say to people, be ready for it. Now you'll notice that this deck is in order. This is my most prized Deviant Moon deck. The one, he says looking around, the one I tend to use the most is this one. So this one always stays in order, so I thought I'd show this one today. Let's pop you back there. Yeah, so all I would say is be ready for it, because it will shine a light on that you don't necessarily want to, or you might not feel comfortable addressing. And it can bring up a lot of stuff that you've buried for a reason. But myself, as somebody who's been through and constantly going through doing shadow work, I find it enormously beneficial to be able to move forward in certain aspects where I will have held myself back. So over the years, tarot has gently brought my attention to old wounds, or unhelpful beliefs, especially somebody who went through religious trauma as well. And it also has helped me confront parts of myself that I'd pushed aside. And tarot has taught me that shadow work isn't about finding yourself necessarily, but it's more about understanding yourself better, and why your behaviors are the way that they are, particularly your instant response to certain behaviors, those things that trigger. In Hinduism, they're called sanskaras, and that is learned behaviors to certain situations. And you're then in that cycle of, I always react that way. And shadow work helps you get to the root of why you react the way that you do. And then once you understand something, particularly something that will hold you back or has a negative impact on your life, once you've shone that light onto that shadow aspect, it loses all of its power to control you. It sets you free. But what I would say is, with shadow work, it's not something that you do once. You know, it's a process to go through, and there might be a lot of shadows in there, because we are the sum of our lived experiences. So, you know, there's a lot to work on, to unpack, to deal with. Okay, so the next prompt. Over time, tarot has taught me discernment, and it's an important lesson when reading tarot. Knowing when a message is genuine insight, because remember, it's just reflecting back, and when it is being coloured, I would even say clouded, probably more than coloured, by fear, and even our expectations, our own expectations. So let me kind of explain that. Many times over the years of working with tarot, I will lay the cards and I will immediately think, oh, I know exactly what this is telling me. And then when that doesn't play out, or when I reflect deeper, perhaps at the end of the day, what I've realized over time is that I've allowed my own expectations of a situation to play out, or my own fear hold me back, and that's what I've overlaid onto the cards, rather than seeing the message as genuine insights into the situation. So I've learned that not every card needs to be taken literally, and that not every initial feeling is truth. Because, as I've said before, there's a lot going on in our lives. So it's almost a paradox of what I've said earlier, because I've said that I've learned to see the tarot not as an external thing, but as an extension of myself. It's still a tool. And actually, you know, we might come to the cards, if we lay them down, we may come to them from a very superficial place and think, okay, this is telling me X, Y, Z. We haven't sat with the cards. We haven't really gone down deep with them. So discernment comes when you have that ability to pause, to reflect, and question. To really question, because that's one of the most important skills that the tarot can teach you. It's certainly one of the most important skills that tarot has given me. Again, both in my spiritual practice and in my daily life. So discernment is required when working with the cards, and it's something that in the past I've learnt the hard way. So now I don't just and this is to me why tarot is so different to the oracle, because the oracle for me is quick responses, whereas tarot requires me to really sit with it and not allow my fears or my expectations to cloud the true meanings of the cards, which would come if I put the work in and the effort in by pausing and reflecting. And that's why my spiritual practice now, my daily spiritual practice, isn't complete unless I do my reflections at the end of each day. Okay, the next prompt is acceptance of change. Tarot constantly reminds us that everything moves in cycles, right? You only have to look at the structure of tarot, the Fool's journey from the beginning through the major arcana, the completion of the world or the universe, and then background we go. That's life. You know, night follows day, spring follows winter. The world evolves around the sun in cycles. Everything is cyclical. And that's the same with the tarot. Things begin, if we think of the minors, the aces, the seed, the start, the thought. They grow and they end. We see that all the while in nature. We're in winter. It's that end period. You know, the trees are bare. There's frost and ice on the ground. but we know that spring is coming, and something else always takes the place after an ending. So tarot has really helped me to accept change rather than resist it. And I was somebody who really wasn't comfortable with change because of that uncertainty, because of that tendency I had to fear, to worry. And it's been a huge lesson for me. But tarot has really helped me to understand that endings aren't failures. Endings aren't final in the true sense. The transitions, the periods of transitions, and as I've discovered, time and time again, they are necessary ones as well. So acceptance of change is a key lesson the tarot has taught me. Okay, I'm now going to move on to how tarot has benefited my spiritual practice. So those were kind of like huge life lessons. And as I said, the two are synonymous really anyway, but this is more focused now for this second part around my spiritual practice and tarot as a spiritual tool within my life. So the first prompt for this is tarot as a daily and weekly spiritual anchor. For me, tarot became something I could return to time and time again. No matter what else was going on in my life, the one constant was the tarot. I've had lots of spiritual shopping, let's put it that way. As you know, my background was in Mormonism. I studied with Jehovah's Witnesses. I studied with Brahma Kumaris. I've been to retreats. I've become a Buddhist. I'm now pagan. I class myself as pagan. But one thing that has been a constant, when all other practices fell away, or my, how can I put it, my belief systems shifted, tarot in some form remained. And by the way I say some form is, there were parts of my adult life where I didn't use the tarot as such. I always had a deck in some form, and you know, I showed the soul cards, but divination, cartomancy has always remained. And that's because for me, the simple act of sitting down with a set of cards created for me a sense of structure and grounding, especially in those moments of uncertainty, or what I would call my chaotic times. And the tarot became a friend. It became an anchor. And we've all got those people in our lives that, you know, as I'm saying this, they're probably going to pop into your thoughts. Those people in your lives that you would trust any of your secrets to, and you know that they wouldn't betray you, they would listen, you know, and they wouldn't judge. And I've got people like that in my life, but I've also got this tool, because I can come to the tarot with any situation that I'm going through, and this spiritual anchor is there for me to keep me grounded, but also give advice without judgment. So yeah, a daily and weekly spiritual anchor. Weekly because I do my week ahead on a Sunday evening, and then daily because I do my intentions in the morning and my reflections in the evening. The next prompt is deepening meditation and journaling. Sometimes it's hard to know where to begin with both meditation. I used to really struggle with meditation as a practice because I'm an overthinker, so trying to quieten the mind and really get to that place of stillness and non-thought was a challenge. Similarly, I found journaling challenging because I used to write a journal like, nice weather today. I got up at 9:15 and I used to think, who on earth wants to read this? Not realizing actually I'm not writing it for other people, I'm writing it for myself. So the tarot helped me with journaling because you've got something to journal on. You pull your 3 cards and you write down your 3 cards, and then you write down your thoughts about each of the cards. So it really helped with that as a practice. It gave me, shall we say, an entry point. And the same with meditation, particularly if you do something like path working. And path working is where, you find yourself with a card and you meditate on that card, and you almost, go into the card and look at the surroundings and become part of it and see what spiritual insights it has to offer. And yeah, a single card could open up a whole line of thought and reflection. And over time, this turned into real dialogue, not just with pulling cards, but listening to what they were stirring up inside me. And I always say to people, if there's a certain deck that you just feel uncomfortable with, that's the ones that I find that are the greatest teachers. Because if we're uncomfortable with some of the images, then explore why. And journaling and meditation really, really helps with that. Because that's a lesson, isn't it? Why am I having the reaction that I'm having with this particular image or these particular cards that are being laid out in front of me? So that's the dialogue. That's the real dialogue, the internal dialogue that you're having based on the cards that are in front of you. The next prompt is supporting earth-based spirituality. Again, this one is in order because this is my super trimmed version. I do have one that's the full size. This is the Llewellyn Tarot. It's coming back next year in a different format, so I'm looking forward to that. But this one is in order. And this really connects me with the earth, as does Druidcraft, which I've just shown. So tarot for me fits naturally with an earth-based way of living. That makes sense? An earth-based way of living. Because, as I mentioned previously, the cards reflect cycles. They reflect seasons. night and day, growth and rest, and also decay. That's the whole nature of life, the whole cyclical way of the universe. So working with tarot, particularly alongside the Wheel of the Year, which is something that I've followed for the last probably 10 years now, helped me to feel more connected to the natural rhythms around me. And that stems back to my Buddhist practice as well, which came before my pagan practice. You know, the self in the environment. Nam-myoho Renge Kyo literally means I dedicate my life to the natural rhythm of the universe, cause and effect, and putting yourself through chanting into that rhythm of the universe and connecting deep with it. And that's why I found the transition very comfortable and easy from going from Buddhism. I still have a lot of Buddhist practice in my spiritual practice, but going from Buddhism to paganism because of the Wheel of the Year and the natural cycles of the universe. So tarot helps me to feel more connected to the natural rhythms around me, rather than feeling like spirituality was something separate from my everyday life. My former church years taught that you should be in the world but not of the world, and that you should always be heavenly minded. And I used to think, well, there's no point being that heavenly minded that you're of no earthly use. And so my practice now is more about putting myself in rhythm with the earth and nature, because that's from where we came and where we will return. And if your life is in harmony with the natural cycles of the world, of nature, of universe, of Gaia, however you want to frame it, then your life is aligned. And the tarot has really supported my earth-based spirituality. The next prompt is the tarot is a language for spirit, ancestors, guides, however you want to term that, because tarot gave me a way to communicate that didn't rely on rigid beliefs or any sort of fixed rules or dogmas, etc. The symbolism within tarot creates a shared language that feels personal and intuitive. And I guess it allowed a space for spirit, ancestors, guides to show up, and show up in a way that feels respectful, that feels open and deeply individual, deeply personal. One of the things that used to stick in my mind if I was in church and I'd hear about communication with the dead, with ancestors, with spirit, was the work of the devil. Here he is. Yeah, communication with the dead is the work of the devil. And I have so moved beyond that. Because life is a mystery. Nobody knows with 100% certainty what happens next after, you know, we leave this physical realm, this earthly plane. Nobody knows with 100% certainty. We may have very strong and fixed beliefs, which is wonderful, particularly if it gives you comfort. But when I work with the tarot, and I'm going about my spiritual practice, I do call upon guides. I believe, although I don't know for certainty, that when my mum moved into spirit, that if there was one person who would keep an eye out from the other place, would be her. She did it in life. She got me out of so many pickles. The phrase that she often used to say, and we chuckled about, would be "Mum to the rescue again." You know, and I talk to her daily. I don't see that as a sign of madness. I see that as my mum is my mum in spirit. And, you know, I'm not constantly badgering her. But I feel that there is communication with her and other ancestors. And if I had a spirit guide before, I think she would be kind of, move over, I'm here now. No, probably supporting alongside. But yeah, I digress. The tarot creates a language for spirit, for ancestors, for guides in a beautiful way, which is a shared language. Okay, but it's deeply personal, and it's intuitive. You know, how many times do we shuffle and say, I call upon my ancestors in spirit, I call upon my guides to help me. What are we doing that for? We're asking for the language of the tarot to align with those in spirit. Okay, the next prompt, and we are coming towards the end. I know this is probably a very long video. The next prompt is encouraging mindful questioning. Because tarot taught me how to ask better questions, basically, in a nutshell. Instead of looking for certainty or prediction, I learned to ask what I needed to understand, what was being asked of me. So it's taking full responsibility. Again, rather than seeing the tarot as an external thing, it's a tool for self-development. It's a tool for self-reflection. So rather than looking for, I want to know how this is going to play out, you know, prediction, and wanting certainty on something, when you realize that the tarot is telling you what you need to understand, what you need to do, and where your attention needs to go. That, and I can almost remember the moment, because that shift alone changed my entire relationship with tarot, with the cards. And it's a huge turning point. I don't know if everybody gets there eventually. And, you know, I've always said I'm not a gatekeeper when it comes to how people use tarot cards. If they never get to that point and they're constantly looking for certainty and they're looking for prediction, that's great. You know, they're still growing their practice with the cards. But there was that shift for me where I changed the way I framed my questions to become more mindful, to ask, what is it that, again, not why, but what is it that I need to understand? How do I move forward? What is being asked of me? Where does my focus need to be? That's when your relationship with the cards flips. Okay, the next prompt kind of melds the two together. I'm talking about everyday life and spiritual practice because it's integrating spiritual insights into everyday life. Because one of the biggest gifts tarot has given me is integration. The insights don't stay on the table, do they? You know, we might lay the cards down and we might leave them out for the day so that we can keep reflecting on it, but they don't stay on the table. They don't just become words in a journal. They come with me. They come with me into everyday life, everyday situations, whether that's into relationships with others, whether that comes into my work, whether that comes into decisions that I'm about to make, be they, I love that devil card, be that small decisions, you know, that don't have huge consequences attached to them, or whether they are life-changing decisions. They might stay on the table as a reminder. They might go into the journal, but how often do we go back through our journal and see what our reading was this time 3 weeks ago? We might do it if we're trying to track progress. But actually, tarot has taught me to integrate the spiritual insights that it gives me into my everyday life. So to take the message from your readings with you, to help you live your spirituality and not just think about it. And that's quite a shift as well. Nothing wrong with sitting and thinking and pondering, but actually do something about it. Take the message with you, apply it throughout your practice, be that everyday practice, like I mentioned, work, relationships, family, or even your spiritual practice. Second to last prompt. So, building spiritual self-trust. This is a huge one for me. Over time, tarot gently, and it was gentle, which it needed to be, but it gently moved me away from relying on external authority. And I think, without getting emotional, I think this is the biggest benefit of having tarot in my life. Because I was somebody who relied on external authority. I relied on being told not just what to do, but how to think, and not to question, and to accept what was. And that stifled me so much that it led to becoming ill and hospitalized, and I've shared that story. I'm not necessarily going to go through it in any depth here, but tarot reminded me, because remember, we've all got that knowledge in us. Tarot reminded me that wisdom doesn't always come from outside. Yes, there are wise people out there. Yes, there are people who've had some life experiences that I talk to and I glean information from. But in essence, it has to come from within. And learning to trust the tarot as an extension of myself. So in essence, learning to trust myself and my own power, my own authority, became one of, if not the most sacred outcomes of my practice. And that's what I hope for every person on this planet, that they find their own power, that they don't allow themselves to be controlled, because mind control is no way to live your life. Reclaiming your personal power, tapping into your own wisdom. No one lives your life but you. You are the sum of your lived experiences. You have the wisdom, you have the knowledge, you have the power, and it comes from within. So learning to trust yourself is sacred. And that is tarot's probably most important lesson that it's taught me. And the final prompt is a sacred dialogue, because that's what tarot is for me. At its heart, tarot created an ongoing conversation for the last 40 years, almost 40 years. A conversation between my conscious mind and something much deeper. The tarot gave shape and language to things I already sensed but couldn't always articulate. Just look how beautiful that is, and its reflection. And look, she's holding a mirror close to her, reflecting what's in. Such a beautiful image. Because, and not to keep saying the same thing, but because the tarot is a mirror to what's happening internally, it's not always easy to make sense. We're complex beings, aren't we? And it's not always easy to make sense of what we're feeling. what we're struggling to understand. But tarot helps to polish the mirror so that it's clear. And allow the conversation between yourself, your conscious mind, and that is within, quite deep, and you're struggling to make sense of. I hope I'm making sense of this. In my mind, I wanted to finish with this one because it really just sums up for me just how important tarot is in terms of articulating through the conscious mind that which is buried deep, that doesn't have a language, that doesn't seem to have any sort of form. You feel it, you experience it, but it's hard to bring it to the surface. This, being the mirror, helps to do that. And that dialogue for me has continued for decades. But it's not done, you know? My life story hasn't fully been written yet. So whilst that conversation has been going on for decades, it continues to grow just as I do. So the tarot, for me, has taught me about that oh so important dialogue with myself, with the conscious mind and the unconscious mind, or, you know, that's buried within that reservoir of wisdom and knowledge, but has been clouded by life experiences, by external factors. And when you sit with your cards, those external factors fall away, and what's left is a beautiful and sacred conversation. And then you see things more clearly. When you polish the mirror, the reflection is clear, it's sharp. So, thank you for watching. Just in closing, I just wanted to summarize and just say that I wanted to do this video because when I look back over the last almost 4 decades of having tarot in my life in some form or other, it has been a constant thread that has just become such an integral part of my daily practice that I wanted to try and, probably for the first time, really articulate why it's an important part of my practice. And to do that, I needed to explore just exactly what tarot has taught me, particularly at key points within my life, key stages. It's been there, as I mentioned, as a companion and a trusted confidant. And that's why, for me, the tarot is my most important and sacred tool. Not because it necessarily predicts the future, but because it's taught me how to live a more authentic life and how to live my truth. It's been a teacher, a friend, a companion, a confidant, as well as a mirror that I hold up to myself. And that's why I hold the practice of using tarot so dearly, and will continue to do so for the rest of my earthly days. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, if If you want to do a VR, that would be great. I know this has been a long one. I don't expect everybody's to be as long as mine. But I would like to hear what tarot taught you through your practice so far. Thank you for watching, everybody, and until next time, go in peace. Namaste and blessed be.